Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning Emir Hashem today, Daf Yud Aleph Amid Aleph. So we are continuing to learn the halachos of Nesias Kapayim, the halachos of Druchening, and we pick up today on the very top line of Yud Aleph Amid Aleph in Siman Kuf Chav Tes, all the way at the end of Sif Aleph. We're up to the top line here on Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, the words of the Ramah, where he says V'haminig Shalanu. So let's just give a brief recap of what the Mechaber has said so far here in Siman Kuf Chav Tes. The topic of discussion has been which tefillahs can we have druchening by and which tefillahs can we not have druchening by. The Mechaber opened up by telling us we can druchen by Shachris, we can druchen by Musaf, and on days that have a tefillah of Ne'ilah, we can druchen by Ne'ilah as well. We're not going to druchen by Ma'ariv, because Ma'ariv, by its very nature, is at night. We know that the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash was not done at night, so there's not going to be any druchening by Ma'ariv. But, says the Mechaber, Shachris, Musaf, Ne'ilah, as long as Ne'ilah is early, it's before Shkia. If Ne'ilah is before nightfall, then technically we could druchen by Ne'ilah as well. But we don't druchen by Mincha. Why is it that we don't druchen by Mincha? The reason we don't druchen by Mincha is because Mincha was, typically speaking, after the main meal of the day, and we're afraid that the Kohanim may have drank wine. They might be shtuya yayin. Remember, all it takes is a revius of yayin, and already the kohen is not allowed to druchen. So we were afraid that the Kohanim might be shtuya yayin, therefore we do not have druchening by Mincha. Ne'ilah, even though Ne'ilah is late on the day, the only days that you have Ne'ilah on are Tanesim. We only have Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a Tainus. Back in the day, in the time of the Mishnah, the Gemara, they had Ne'ilah also on certain Tanesim. If they were geyser Tanesim on the Tzibur, maybe for a lack of rain or some other tzara, there were Tanesim where they had Ne'ilah. So they had more days with Ne'ilah than we do. We only have Yom Kippur. But be that as it may, you only had Ne'ilah on a fast day. So there's no problem with druchening by Ne'ilah because the Kohanim can't be shtuya yayin. Having said that, the question came up about Mincha. Okay, we don't druchen by Mincha on a regular day because of the fear that the Kohanim might be shtuya yayin. But how about Mincha on a fast day? The same way we could druchen by Ne'ilah on a tainus, why can't we druchen by Mincha on a tainus? So the Mechaber differentiated between two types of Tanesim. In essence, what we learned in the Mechaber is the reason why we don't have druchening on a fast day is a gzeira. What's the gzeira? The gzeira is, if we're going to druchen by Mincha on a fast day, people might look and they say, oh, so we do druchen by Mincha. And then they'll come to druchen on a regular day by Mincha, which we can't do because the Kohanim might be shtuya yayin. But the Mechaber said, it depends on the type of tainus. Two types of tanesim. You have the tanesim that we have, the Dalit tanesim. You have Asar B'Tevis, Shiva Asar B'Tamas, Tisha B'Av Tzav Gedalia, and add to that list tainus Esther. Those tanesim don't have Ne'ilah. That's one type of tainus. Then we had the tanesim, the tainus tzibur back in the day, where they did have Ne'ilah. What's the difference between these two types of Tanesim? So the Mechaber told us, and the Mishnah Berurah explained it to us, he said that when they had a Tainus that had Ne'ilah, a Tainus with Ne'ilah, they were noyig to daven Mincha early. Why? Because they knew that they had another tefillah that they had to insert in the day yet. They had to insert Ne'ilah. So by a Tainus that had Ne'ilah, they davened Mincha early in the day. And on regular days throughout the year, it was also their minig to daven Mincha early in the day. Therefore, says the Mechaber, those are the types of Tanesim where there's room to make a gzera that you should not duchen on those Tanesim by Mincha, because if you do, people might come to make a mistake and think that you duchen on a regular Mincha. That's only by Tanesim that have Ne'ilah. Because of the Tanesim that have Ne'ilah, you daven Mincha early, the same way you daven Mincha early throughout the year. But by the other Tanesim, the Tanesim that we keep, Asar B'Tevis, Shiva Asar B'Tamas, Tisha B'Av Tzav Gedalia, Tainus Esther, By those Tanesim, their minig was not to daven mincha ad samach l'shkia all the way at the end of the day. That's different, apparently, than what their minig was throughout the year. Their minig throughout the year was to daven mincha early. Therefore, said the Mechaber, we could duchen by mincha on the Tanesim that do not have ni'ilah, because they're not going to be confused with a mincha of a regular day. That's what we learned so far here in Siman Kuf Chav Tesif Aleph. Now we go to the top line of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, where the Ramah says, "V'haminig shalanu." Now that we went through this whole discussion, and we said that we could duchen by Shachris, we could duchen by Musaf, we could duchen by Ne'ilah, we could duchen on our Tanesim, the Tanesim that we keep that don't have Ne'ilah. Where does that leave us? Says the Ramah, "V'haminig shalanu kvar nispar le'el Siman Kuf Chav Ches Sif Mem Dalid." We already told you what our minig is back in the beautiful Siman Kuf Chav Ches in Siman Mem Dalid. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Ches, V'haminig shaladu, Ritzaynai Laimar, what the Mechaber is, what the Ramah is referring to is what we learned previously, She'ein noisim kapayim klal b'medina isenu, that in our countries, in our regions, we don't do duchening at all, b'chol yamais hashana, throughout the year, rak b'yamim tovim. We only duchen on Yom Tiv, v'gam zer rak b'tfilos musaf, and even on Yom Tov we only duchen by musaf, and we learned that the reason for that is that we duchen when you are b'simcha u'b'tov leiv, from the pasuk of Shlomo Melech in Mishlei, where Shlomo Melech writes, Toiv ayin hu yavorach, and we had the Gemara in Saita that says, Al tikri yavorach ela yavarech. It takes one who is Toiv ayin, one who is Malei Simcha, and he's feeling generous and giving, and he has a Toiv ayin, he has a good eye, and a Toiv leiv. That's the person who is Yavarech. That's when the Kohanim could do Birchas Kohanim. So that's the only time that we do in here in Chutz La'aretz. Umikol Makaim, nevertheless, continues the Chavetz Chaim, Kol hadinim hanizkarim b'siv zeh, all the halachos that we just learned over here in Kol Chav Tes Sif Aleph, nafkamina gam l'didan. It does make, there is a nafkamina to us. Even though we only do it by Musaf and on Yom Tov, there's still a nafkamina to us in these halachos. Why? Le'inyan amira selikeinu v'lekev v'seidu barchedu barbracha amshuleshes b'atayra ksuva yidei Moshe avdecha. This is in accordance with what we learned in Siman Kuf Chav Zayin Sif Beis. By a tefillah that min hadin you're allowed to duchen, then we insert etc., etc. So where does that leave us? Well, on our Tanesim, where we do not say ni'ilah, so our Tanesim, really may ikar adin, you're allowed to duchen, because there's no gzeira. You're not going to make a gzeira of our Tanesim, and it doesn't matter, I mentioned this yesterday, it doesn't matter when we daven mincha on our Tanesim nowadays. Nowadays, a lot of people daven mincha early on a Tainus. So you might think, okay, so maybe there should be room for gzeira, that we might confuse mincha on the Tainus with mincha of a regular day throughout the year. No, we don't say that. Since in Shas, what's brought down is that you're allowed to duchen on a Tainus that doesn't have Ne'ilah, because back in the time of the Mishnah, in the time of the Gemara, the minig was to daven early throughout the year, but to daven late on a Tainus, so there's no room for a Gzeira. So now too, even if we daven early on a Tainus Tzibur, it doesn't matter. We still say Elokeinu v'Elokeinu V'Seinu, because by Ikar Adin, you would be allowed to duchen by that tefillas mincha. Hope everything is okay. I just saw my computer acting a little funny, but everything seems to be all right. So we're going to go weiter. Okay. Now we go to Sif Beis. Top line here on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch says the Mechaber. Kayin she'avar va'ola laduchen b'yom HaKippurim b'mincha. Okay. Yom Kippur, mincha. Yom Kippur is a tainus, but there's ni'ilah. So since Yom Kippur is a tainus with ni'ilah, the gzeira not to duchen by mincha applies to Yom Kippur. Because Yom Kippur, you're, so to speak, going to daven mincha earlier in the day, even though most of us end up davening mincha quite late in the day on Yom Kippur, but it's a tainus with ne'ilah. So according to the rules that we learned here in Sef Aleph, there's no duchening by mincha on a tainus that has ne'ilah. So says the Mechaber, kayin she'avar, a kayin who broke the rules, va'ala l'duchen b'yom kippur b'mincha, and before you could stop him, he's up there by the Aron HaKodesh, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam ha'sheket, Yishanu b'kedushaso shel Aaron, v'tzidvanu levarach Am Yisrael ba'ahava. So he's duchening. What do? Says the Mechaber, kevan she'adavar yadua she'ein sham shechrus. Let's remember, bottom line is, the only reason we don't have duchening by mincha is because we're afraid that the Kohanim might be shtuya yayin. On Yom Kippur, we know that the Kohen is not shtuya yayin. So kevan she'adavar yadua she'ein sham shechrus, harei ze noisi as kapav, we let him go ahead and duchen, ve'ein mo'ridin oisai, and we don't take him down from the duchen. Why? Mipnei hakshad. What does that mean, mipnei hakshad? Because of suspicion. Shelo yomru pasol hu l'kacha ridu. We don't want anyone to see that we're going and we're yanking this kohen off the duchen, and then somebody's going to say, yeah, that guy, you think he's a kohen? I don't know, there's something about his yichus. Maybe he's a kohen pasol, maybe he's a cholol, or something else, because I remember once he went up to duchen and Yom Kippur and they yanked him down off the duchen, so don't be so sure that he's a kosher kohen. We don't want that to happen, and therefore we allow him to duchen. Hagar says the Rama, v'lachein, and therefore oimrim b'mincha b'yom kippurim elikeinu v'lekaviseinu. So says the Rama, because of this, since the bottom line is that if somebody that me'ikar adin, there's really no reason not to duchen by mincha on Yom Kippur, because there's no real fear of anybody being shtuya yayin. The only reason we don't duchen by mincha on Yom Kippur is because since there's ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, we're making a gzeira. If somebody sees you duchen by mincha on Yom Kippur, he might think that you should duchen on a regular weekday by mincha. That's the only reason we don't duchen. Lamaisa, if somebody does go up and duchen, we let him duchen. So says the Ramah, it turns out that on some level, there is a makayim for duchening on mincha Yom Kippur. So therefore, says the Ramah, therefore, because the afagav the ein royal in the siyas kapayim. Even though halacha lamaisa, we're not going to duchen on mincha Yom Kippur, mikal makayim, nevertheless, hayol v'im alo lo yereit, since the bottom line is that there is room for such a duchening, at least to the extent that if a kohen would go up and start duchening, we wouldn't yank him down, v'im alo lo yereit, mikri ktsas. That is considered that mincha Yom Kippur is somewhat roy for the siyas kapayim, and therefore we could say Elokeinu v'lekaviseinu. And the Ramah closes out the Siman and he says, "V'chein noi hagid b'medinas elu," and that is the minig in our medinas. Afal pi sheyesh cholkim, even though there are those who disagree with this psak, yet halacha l'maisa, the way we paskin is that we do say Elokeinu v'lekaviseinu b'cheinu b'bracha, etc. in mincha on Yom Kippur. Ois cotton test in the Mishnah Berurah says the Chavetz Chaim, shahadavar yodua, since it's very well known that you're not going to have a kohen who shtuya yayin by mincha on Yom Kippur, ritzayna loymar v'lo yasru bazeh, and therefore the only reason we're prohibited from duchening by mincha on Yom Kippur, kiim mishum de mechalef b'shar yomei, is only because of the chash and the risk that mincha on Yom Kippur may become confused with the regular mincha, and people might think that you duchen by mincha on a regular Wednesday throughout the year. Therefore, we don't yank him down off the duchen if he already went up. But if somebody went up to duchen by a regular mincha on a regular weekday throughout the year, im Allah yered. If he goes up, you bring him down. It's not a time for the siyas kapayim. We don't duchen by mincha. Oiskar Yud Mikri Ktsas Roy, we're saying on mincha and Yom Kippur that since b'diavad, if a kohen went up to duchen, we don't pull him off the duchen. Since that's true, it's Mikri Ktsas Roy. So mincha and Yom Kippur is considered to be a little bit roy for the siyas kapayim, and therefore we say Elokeinu v'lekaviseinu. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, Hamisanim ad chatzos, people who have a minhag to fast on a half a day, on a particular day. Umispalel in mincha, and then they daven mincha. Kigayin be'erev Rosh Hashanah v'chadayma. Lo yomer hashliach tzibur leikeinu v'leikei v'seinu afilu l'shitazu. In other words, we don't extend this logic. This logic that since im olo lo yered, if the kohen went up to do Chedar Mincha Yom Kippur, you're not going to yank him down. Therefore, we say leikeinu v'leikei v'seinu. We're not going to extend that to, let's say, a day like Erev Rosh Hashanah with his Achatzi Yom Tainus, and say that we should say leikeinu v'leikei v'seinu in Mincha. Okay. Now we go weiter. We turn to Siman Kof Lamed. And here, finally, we already touched upon the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam, Chaloi b'chalamti ve'eino yedei mahu. So this is the tefillah that most of us have the minhag to recite it twice during Birchas Kohanim, once between the first bracha and the second bracha, right? Between V'yishmerecha and Yo'er, a second time between the second bracha and the third bracha, so that would be between V'yichuneka and Yisa. And then at the end of Birchas Kohanim, after the third bracha, most of us had the minhag to say the longer Yihiratzen. And although we're going to see that that's not a davar muskam, that some people didn't say that Yihiratzen, and instead they said Ribbono Shel Olam 3 times. But I think the more common minhag is to say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam 3 times. Now we already touched on it in Siman Kof Chav Ches, when we were discussing which words in Birchas Kohanim the Kohanim stretch out, and when the Kohanim sing, and we said that that's when you say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. But this siman over here in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Kof Lamed, this is really where this tefillah is introduced to us and where we really discuss it. So let's take a look here at the Mechaber. Siman Kof Lamed, Ribbono Shel Olam she'omrim b'shas nesiyas kapayim. The tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam that we say during Birchas Kohanim, ubai sif echad, and here we have one sif. Says the Mechaber here in sif aleph, which is the only sif, says the Mechaber, man dechaza chelma, somebody who experienced a dream, v'lo yada mai chaza, and he doesn't know what he saw. What does that mean? He doesn't know what he saw. So if you take a look at Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Bays, the Mishnah Berurah says v'lo yada itavahu oibishahu. He doesn't know how to interpret this dream, and he brings this down from the El Yerabah. El Yerabah says, what does this mean that he doesn't know? The Mechaber says he doesn't know what it is. What does that mean he doesn't know what it is? It means he doesn't know if it's a good dream or a bad dream. He doesn't know how to interpret it somehow. Was it a good dream? Is it a bad dream? Okay. So says the Mechaber, man dechaza chelma, somebody who experienced a dream, v'lo yada mai chaza, and he doesn't know precisely the meaning of this dream. Nekom kami kahani b'shasha elam laduchan. He should stand before the kahanim when they go up to the duchen to perform Birchas Kohanim. V'neima hachi, and he should say the following: Ribbono Shel Olam, ani shalach v'chaloi moisai shalach. I am yours, and my dreams ultimately are yours. V'yechavein v'chulei, and then he should say the rest of the tefillah. We know the tefillah, we have it printed in our Machzorim and our Sidurim. Says the Mechaber, when he says the tefillah, v'yechavein, he should have intent, de l'sayim bahadi kahani, that he should finish this tefillah, this Ribbono Shel Olam. I have a funny feeling it's not in this siddur. Let me see. He should finish it at the same time that the Kohanim finish their bracha. In other words, you're going to have Yivarechecha Hashem. Then, according to our minhag, the Chazan is going to call out V'yishmerecha. Now the Kohanim are singing na 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 na. Everybody's saying Ribbono Shel Olam. When they finish saying Ribbono Shel Olam, the Kohanim are going to say V'yishmerecha. Says the Mechaber that what we want is you should finish saying the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam when the Chazan finishes saying V'yishmerecha. That way, when the tzibur says Amen, they're saying Amen both to the bracha of Yivarechecha Hashem V'yishmerecha and to your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. Let me just look here. I'm looking in the siddur, but this happens to be, it's a Eretz Yisrael Dika siddur. And somehow, I have a feeling, they have Birchas. Oh, they do have the Ribbono. No. They don't have the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam here in this siddur. V'sishpereni v'sechaneni v'sirtzeni. That's the end of the tefillah. So he's saying over here that we should be mechavein to finish together at the same time as the Kohanim, so that the amen should go on both. It should go on the bracha of Birchas Kohanim, and it should go on the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam as well. V'yechaven the Yelsayim b'Hadi Kahani doni tzibura amen. So the tzibur should say amen to both. V'iloi. Now let's say you didn't finish at the same time as the Kohanim. Let's say you finished before the Kohen said v'yishmerecha. What should you do? It says the Bechaber Leim Hachi. You should insert the following. You should say Adir b'Maroin Sheichein b'Gvura Ata Shalom v'Shimcha Shalom Yiratzain Shetasim Aleinu Shalom. Insert this little pasuk and tefillah at the end of your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. That way you're lengthening your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam, and finish it together with the Kohen when the Kohen finishes the bracha of Birchas Kohanim. So again, you should pick up the amen from the tzibur. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's go to Mishnah Berurah's cut and aleph. Man de chaza. The way the mechaber gives us this halacha, he's making it optional. Not optional, but what he's saying is, if you experienced a dream and you're worried that the dream may have been a bad dream, then you should say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam during Nesias Kapayim, during Duchening. But what if not? What if you didn't have a bad dream? So then, don't say it, right? But says the Mishnah Berurah, in our regions, Naihagen kol hakol lemar tefillah zu. The minig is that the entire tzibur says this tefillah b'shas haduchin during Birchas Kohanim. Afilu oisam shaloi cholmu. Even somebody who didn't dream at all. V'atam, and the reason for this is the kevan de ein anu noisek kapayim kiyim berigolim. Since, like we've said already several times, we only have duchening on Yom Tov. He says it's highly unlikely that at some point between Sukkot and Pesach, you didn't have a bad dream. If you're in Eretz Yisrael and you're duchening every day, so fine. If I didn't have a bad dream last night, why should I say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam today? But if the last time I experienced duchening was Sukkot, and now it's Pesach, so sometime between Sukkot and Pesach, you probably had a dream that you at least had an idea it might have been a bad dream. So when it comes to Pesach, you're going to say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam going back on those dreams. Now, there's an interesting Dirshu footnote over here. Dirshu footnote number 1. I have to find it. Dirshu footnote number 1. The second paragraph of this footnote addresses a very interesting question. How about a Kohen who had a bad dream? The Kohen can't say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. He's in the middle of duchening. So how about a Kohen who had a bad dream? So he writes over there, the Kohanim, who don't have the opportunity to say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam in the middle of duchening, Kasav HaChesed LaAlofim, the Sefer Chesed LaAlofim writes, Miskayim Nimtokim Chaloi Moisehem, that their dreams, the dreams of the Kohanim, will become sweetened Be'ez Shebevarchem Es Yisrael, when they're giving the Birchas Kohanim to Klal Yisrael, they don't need to say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. The koyach of Birchas Kohanim, the non-Kohanim that are listening to the brachas, they say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam in the middle of Birchas Kohanim, and they're hoping that the koyach of Birchas Kohanim will be mahapech their dream from bad to good. Says the footnote over here, says the Chesed LaAlofim, that the Kohanim who are giving the bracha, the koyach of the bracha will work for the Kohanim as well. Their dreams will become sweetened be'ez shebevarchem es Yisrael, at the time that they give the brachas to Klal Yisrael. Sheyichavnu hadavar hanitzrach lehem, they should have kavanah in what they need. V'yanatzlo yedei zeh me'azam ki Yisrael u'misparchim imam, and they will be saved from any travails together with Klal Yisrael that they are busy giving a bracha to. Okay. We did Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Bays. Now let's go to Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Gimel. V'neim no hachi. Somebody who had a bad dream, he should say the following tefillah. Ukfar nispar le'el soif siman kuf chav chesif memhei. In siman kuf chav chesif memhei, we already discussed the Bahagah in the words of the Ramah. That the proper place to insert the mechaber just says somebody with a bad dream during duchening, he should say this tefillah. When do you say it during duchening? So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, nice cut and gimel, we already learned at the end of Siman Kuf Chav Ches that the place to say it is when the Kohanim are singing between each one of the three brachas, between bracha number 1 and bracha number 2, bracha number 2 and bracha number 3, and after bracha number 3, when the Kohanim are stretching out the last word of each bracha, that's when you say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. Ois Cotton Daled, we say to the Ribbono Shel Olam, Ani shalach v'chaloi moisai shalach. HaMagen Avram, Kasav, the Magen Avram writes, Tzarech loymar, Bein chaloi moishe chalamti al acherim. When we say this tefillah, we have to ask the Ribbono Shel Olam to sweeten and take care, Bein chaloi moishe chalamti al acherim, both dreams that we dreamed about other people, and also dreams that we dreamed about ourselves. Aval b'sidurim shalanu, but the Chavetz Chaim says in our sidurim, hanuscha lehepich. The nusach is the opposite. The hainu, which is we say, bein shechalamti al atzmi, we're asking the Ribbono Shel Olam to take care of our dreams, whether we dreamed about ourselves, ubein shechalamti al acherim, or whether we dreamed about other people. So we just swip the order. V'chein hiskim be'el Rabbah, and the El Rabbah agrees to the order that we use. Kasva Achrayim, the Achrayim write, Sheyisayim b'tefillah zu b'pam rishayin v'sishmereni. See, if you look at the Siddur and the Machzor, at the end of this Ribbono Shel Olam, the final words of this tefillah are v'sishmereni usechaneni v'sirtzeni. So the first one is v'sishmereni. You should watch me. You should guard me. The second one is usechaneni. You should treat me with graciousness. And finally, lastly, we say v'sirtzeni. And you should treat me in a pleasing way. That's the way we end off this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam, with 3 words. The Mishnah Berurah introduces to us an interesting minig. He says that the Achrayim write a minig, sheyisayim b'tefillah zu b'pam rishayin. The first time you say the Ribbono Shel Olam in Birchas Kohanim, so that's after the word v'yishmerecha, you should say v'sishmereni. Keneged Masha Kohanim Esayim v'yishmerecha, because the last word of the first bracha is v'yishmerecha, and he should watch you. So we should end off the Ribbono Shel Olam v'sishmereni, and you should watch us, the way the Kohanim just said v'yishmerecha. Ubepam shniya, the second time you say the Ribbono Shel Olam, which is after v'chuneka usechaneni. So the Kohanim just gave you a bracha vichuneka, and now we ask the Ribbono Shel Olam taka usechaneni. You should treat me with graciousness. Keneged vichuneka. Ubepam shlishis v'sirtzeni keneged shalom. And the third time you would say at the end of Ribbono Shel Olam, assuming you're saying the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam and not the long Yehiratzon, so then you would say v'sirtzeni keneged shalom. For Ashal Moisef, the Marshal adds shetov loymar b'pashlishis, that it would be good to say after the third Ribbono Shel Olam, v'savai alai birchas kohanecha, it should come to me the brachas of your kohanim, v'sirtzeni. He brings us down to El Yerab and Magen Yiborim. Kishenoisik kapayim b'yom tov shecha b'Shabbos, when you have birchas kohanim on a yom tov that falls out on Shabbos, ein loimer haribain. Then we don't say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam chalom chalamti ve'eni adamau. Why not? De'ein oimrim tchina b'Shabbos, because we know the rule is that we do not make bakashos on Shabbos. We don't ask the Ribbono Shel Olam for our tzarchim on Shabbos. That's not appropriate for Shabbos. Shabbos, we have amun and betachin, we have complete faith that the Ribbono Shel Olam will give us and does give us on a constant basis whatever we need. So we don't have to make bakashos on Shabbos. And also, it's not befitting Shabbos is a time for shirais v'sishpachais. Shabbos is a time for us to praise the Ribbono Shel Olam, not for us to ask the Ribbono Shel Olam for things. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, kishanaisav kapayim b'yom tov shachal b'Shabbos, if you're duchening on Yom Tov that falls out on Shabbos, ein loimer haribain. We don't say this tefillah. Dein oimrim tchina b'Shabbos im loike shachalam lechalam ra b'is halayla, unless you know that you had a bad dream the night before. If you had a bad dream the night before, then you could say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. And the truth is, it's not an isser to make tchinos on Shabbos. As a matter of fact, the halacha is, we've seen this already many times, if somebody had a really bad dream, he's allowed to make a tainus chaloim on Shabbos. Now, he has to keep another tainus after his tainus chaloim on Shabbos to get kapara for the fact that he fasted on Shabbos. But you see, you're allowed to fast on Shabbos at tainus chaloim. So certainly, you're allowed, in a b'diavad situation, certainly, you could say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam if you know that you had a bad dream. Okay, Ois Katnehei, the Mechaber told us that we should try to be Messiah, to finish the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time that the Kohanim finished the bracha of Birchas Kohanim. So we should say, Usechaneni, while the Chazan is saying V'yishmerecha, and while he's saying V'chuneka. That way we pick up the Amen, the Tzibur is going to say Amen, the Amen should go in our tefillah as well. Siman. He means over here at the end of each bracha that marks at the end of each pasuk that marks the end of one of the brachas. There are three such sections in Kriya Shema. And the Mishnah Berurah brings down that it's written in the name of the Gra. Like I mentioned earlier, we say a very long Yehiratzon after the end of the third bracha, all the way at the end of Birchas Kohanim, when the Kohanim say, when they're busy singing, between when the Chazan calls out Shalom and when the Kohanim say Shalom, we're noyig to say this long Yehiratzon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'chei kaseh b'shem Agra, shahaya noyig loymer gam b'seif pasuk shlishi Ribbono Shel Olam anal. The Gra had the minig to say the regular Ribbono Shel Olam Chaloim Chalamtu V'eni Yidamau. He had the minig to say that even after the third bracha instead of the lengthy Yehiratzon. V'loi ha-Yehiratzon ha-nitzvas b'sidurim, that he didn't say. Okay. Then the Mechaber told us that if you finished the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam before the Kohen said V'yishmerecha or V'chuneka or Shalom, right? So then you should extend your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam by adding in Adir B'Maroim Shechen Migvura Ato Shalom V'Shimcha Shalom Yiratzon Shetasim Aleinu Shalom. And hopefully that you'll finish together with the Shliach Tzibur when he says V'yishmerecha or V'chuneka or Shalom. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yiloi le'mahachi pirish shaloi simu adayin ha'kehanim. If the Kohanim still didn't finish the bracha, but you did, so Yomer, you should say Gam Adir B'Marim. You should say this tefillah of Adir B'Marim, Ki Hechi Delasai B'Hadi Kani Teva Shalom, so that you should finish your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time that the Chazan says Hamavarech Es Abba Yisrael B'Shalom. Adir B'Marim B'Shas Amir Shliach Tzibur Sim Shalom B'Shas Shalom Nesiyas Kapayim Kal Shana Rak B'Yom Tov. 1 second. No, I missed a line here. Let's start again from the beginning of Ois Katan Vav. V'yi loy lema pirish shaloi simu adayin ha'kehanim. If you finished your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam before the Kohanim finished, yomer gam adir b'marim, you should add in adir b'marim ki hechi delusayim b'hadi kani teva shalom, so that you should finish your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam together with when the Kohanim say either v'yishmerecha, v'chuneka, or shalom. V'yanu atzibur amen al shneim, and then the tzibur will answer amen both to the Birchas Kohanim and to your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. But says the Chavetz Chaim, v'yesh hagim, there are those that have the minig shebechol pam oimrim adir b'marem b'shas amir shliat tzibur sim shalom b'shas sha'omer v'tov be'inecha. There are those that have the minig besides what's being brought down over here, and that's our minig, and that's what's printed in the Sidurim and in the Machzorim, is to say adir b'marem all the way at the end of Birchas Kohanim. After the Kohanim already said shalom, now the Chazan starts sim shalom. While he is saying sim shalom, we say adir b'marem shechem b'gvura, etc., etc. Ois katan zayin uva makayim. We didn't do this yet. Now we go to the words of the Ramah. The very bottom line here on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph says the Ramah, uva makayim she'ein oilam l'duchen. What if you're in a place where there isn't going to be any duchening? Maybe you live in a small town somewhere, there are no Kohanim, and you don't even have duchening on Yom Tov. So what do you do if you had a bad dream? Says the Ramah, v'makom shein oilu l'duchen, in a place where you don't have duchening, yoymar kol zeh b'shah she'ashliach tzibur omer sim shalom. Then you should say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam while the shliach tzibur is saying sim shalom. V'yasayim b'hadi shliach tzibur, and finish off your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time that the shliach tzibur finishes the bracha of sim shalom, which means when he says hamavarech esam Yisrael b'shalom sheyanu hakahal amen, so that the killer should answer amen both to your tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam chalom chalamti v'nei de'amau and the Chazan's bracha of sim shalom. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Zayin, 4 lines off the bottom here. Uva makom she'ein oilam l'duchen, in a place where there's no duchening. Says the Mishnah Berurah, K'mayim b'medina yiseinu she'ein nisiyas kapan kol hashana rak b'Yom Tov. What do you do by us if we only duchen on Yom Tov and you had a bad dream Chanukah time? What do? You worry about it until Pesach, and then you say the Ribbono Shel Olam on Pesach by duchening? So he says, no. What you do then is, you say the Ribbono Shel Olam during the Shliach Tzibur's recitation of Sim Shalom, Toivo, Vracha, etc., etc. Now, first, the Mishnah Berurah, all the way here at the end of Siman Kuf Lamed, after we've been discussing Birchas Kohanim for such a long time, now suddenly the Chavetz Chaim decided to define laduchen, what the word duchen means. Duchen, Perushai, the explanation of the word duchen is the place that the Kohanim go up to in front of the Aron Kodesh when they do Birchas Kohanim, Nesiyas Kapayim, that's called the duchen. You say this tefillah at the time that the Chazan is saying sim shalom. What is yoymar kol zeh? You should say all of this. Pirish tefillas ribayin. We mean the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam. V'im gamar haribayin kaidim shesiyam ashlei tefillah sim shalom. We said that if you say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam in Birchas Kohanim, you should try to arrange it so that you finish the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time that the kohen finishes one of the brachas of Birchas Kohanim, so that you pick up the amen of the tzibur on both. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what if you live in one of those places where they never have duchening, and you're saying the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam within the Chazan's rendition of sim shalom? So then you should try to have kavana to finish your Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time as his sim shalom. If you failed to, if you finished it earlier, then yarmagamken adir b'marem. So then you'll say adir b'marem shenikim gvura v'chanal. Kasra achrayim, the achrayim write the ein lamer tefillas v'yibayin b'chol yom v'yom. You shouldn't say, let's say you live in Eretz Yisrael where they duchen every day. You shouldn't say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam on your bad dreams every single day. Only if you had a bad dream the night before. If you didn't have a bad dream the night before, or a dream that you don't know, that you don't understand, so you don't know if it's good or bad, if you didn't have such a dream the night before, why are you saying this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam? And also, you're going to say a sheker. You're going to say chalom chalamti ve'eni yedamau. It's not true. You didn't have such a dream. So he says, if you're duchening every day, don't say this tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam every day. Only if you had either a bad or an ambiguous dream the night before. How could you stand in front of the Ribbono Shel Olam and say chalom chalamti ve'eni yedamau if you didn't even have a dream? Sim shalom v'imra shel yuchal asayim b'mashlei tzibur. if you see that you cannot end off the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam at the same time as the chazan, yaschel b'shasha sheyasiv ha'omi yavarechecha. If you need more time to say the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam, you could start saying the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam as soon as the kohen says Yivarechecha. Because the point is that the tefillah of Ribbono Shel Olam should be uttered within Birchas Kohanim. So once the kohen says Yivarechecha, you're already in Birchas Kohanim. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Ribbono Shel Olam should say Yeshua Sefuas Parnassus should do to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the B'Yeskel Tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.